Okay.
Okay, so you can hear me now. Okay. All right, I'm gonna cross some things out. All right, I'll just go through it quick. Let me know when we're live, please.
Okay.
So we're ending at 1:45 regardless. Okay. All right. Are we good to start? Okay, cool. Hello everyone, sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll do a take two. My name is Cara, and behind the camera we have Josh and Lauren. Before we get started, teachers, if you could really quickly just type your student count in the chat, that would be very appreciated. And then throughout the event, if you guys have any questions, you can also type those in the chat. I'll be taking a few breaks to answer your guys' questions. And if I don't get to your question today, don't worry, I'll be typing answers to all of the questions and sending them out to you guys. But with that being said, I would love to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Cara, and I'm here today with Explore Ecology, thanks to Santa Barbara County's Project Clean Water. Explore Ecology is an organization that goes around to schools across Santa Barbara and teaches about how we can protect our earth. So we teach about things like how we can make less trash, how we can keep our oceans clean, and we do really fun events like the one we are at today, terrific Tidepools. So I want to start with a little introduction to where we are today. Oil Point Reserve in Goleta, California. And this beach is right down the coast from UC Santa Barbara. It's actually behind me in the distance there. So it's a really great place for students and researchers to come and understand more about our intertidal ecosystem. This beach is also located on the Santa Barbara Channel. So that's the strip of ocean between the Santa Barbara coastline and the Channel Islands. And it's a really important part of our ocean because there's a lot of diversity. Lots of different animals and algae live out there and migrate through the channel. So it's a great place to see animals not only in the ocean, but also on the shores here. And one more really important thing about Coal Oil Point Reserve is that it is a marine protected area, or an MPA. There are over 100 MPAs throughout California, and basically these are just safe places for animals and algae and plants to thrive where they won't be harmed. So what that means for Coal Oil Point is that it is a no-take beach. So anything that we found while tide pooling today is going to be left behind when we go. And these MPAs are especially important for endangered animals. Speaking of which, I'd like to introduce you to our first animal, which is the abalone. So I didn't find this shell on the beach today. I actually brought it with me so that you guys could take a look. This is a red abalone shell. There are 7 different species of abalone throughout California, and all 7 of them have been endangered. The reason that these animals are endangered are because of habitat loss and also because of over-harvesting. In the past, abalone was a really big export for California, so people would go out and find them and then sell them for food and also for art. Their shells are very beautiful. They'd be used in jewelry and other artworks. But we took too many from the wild, and now populations are kind of struggling. So that's why it's super important to have MPAs throughout the state for animals like the abalone to rebound and thrive. Now, right now we're looking at the inside of an abalone. An abalone is a type of sea snail. So this is where the body of the sea snail would be. It would fit in this nice shell here. And you can see the inside of their shell is very shiny and beautiful rainbow colors. So you can see why they might want to use that for jewelry and art. If we flip the shell over, you can see that the shell is not quite as colorful and it's a lot more textured. That helps the abalone to blend into its environment. And if it were out in the ocean, there would be algae growing on it as well to help the abalone camouflage even more. So a really cool animal, really special animal to start off our tide pool event with. I'm going to go ahead and set this back down. And I want to tell you guys about the ecosystem that we are in right now. We are in what's called the intertidal ecosystem. And the intertidal is where the land meets the ocean. And it's really influenced by the tides that go up and down each day. So depending on where the tide is, the animals living here might be experiencing different things. We call them abiotic and biotic factors. So abiotic are non-living factors. So things like the sunlight and the heat and the waves crashing and the wind. And biotic factors could be things like predators that might want to try and eat the animals in the tide pool. So as the tide goes in and out, these factors change throughout the day. And because these factors are always changing, the intertidal is a pretty gnarly place to live in. Lots of these animals have pretty cool adaptations that help them survive in this harsh ecosystem. So as we take a look at some animals, I'll be mentioning some pretty cool adaptations that these guys have to help them live in the intertidal. But I want to continue talking about snails because snails are a really common thing to find in our tide pools. So let me go ahead and grab one for us to take a look at. So right now I'm just grabbing a snail that we found in the tide pool. And I want to say really quickly that I have experience handling snails. But that does not mean that anyone should just go and grab snails because they can be pretty fragile. So here we go. Here's our first live animal here. This is a wavy top turban snail, one of the largest snails we can find on our coast here. We actually found quite a few of these today. These are herbivorous snails, so that means that they eat algae, mostly giant kelp. And you can see that they've got lots of different things growing on their shell here to help them camouflage. This right here is the body of the snail. This bottom part is called the foot. This is how the snail kind of suctions onto rocks and sand and moves around. So they have really strong feet, a really strong foot that helps them to stay attached to the rocks when waves are pounding over them as the tides go in and out. So that's a pretty cool thing that they have. Take a second to observe this beautiful snail. And then we'll go ahead and put the snail back in the water. but a really cool observation that we found here today. Ah! So you might have seen lots of water coming out of the shell there. Snails will actually take up water into their shells because when the tide goes out and there's not a lot of water in the intertidal, it's helpful for these snails to have water inside of their shells to keep them from drying out. So that's what we were seeing right there. But I want to talk about another snail that's a little bit different than the wavy-top turban snail. I found this shell here, and this is from a different kind of sea snail. Obviously, the snail's not alive anymore, but this was once a kellet whelk snail. Now we just have their shell here. And unlike the turban snail, a kellet's whelk is a carnivore. They actually will even eat other snails. They have this really interesting part of their body called a proboscis. Kind of looks like a long tongue or like an elephant's trunk almost, that they use to drill into shells. Pretty crazy. And this type of snail also has an interesting adaptation to living in the intertidal. We can't see it now because there's no snail, but we can imagine that they would have a little like hard plate around their opening of the shell here. That is called an operculum. You can think of it kind of like a trap door. So when the snail is without water or exposed to the heat, or maybe if it senses a threat like a predator, they can close that trap door, close that operculum, and stay safely hidden inside of their hard shell. All right, we'll take a little break and have some questions. Yeah. How fast is the turban snail? Not very fast. Most snails are not fast at all, but they do move around. If you, there's actually one in this pool over here, and it'll move back and forth across, but not very fast, not like a cheetah.
Are these snails local to the Santa Barbara area?
Yes, these snails can be found in the Santa Barbara area and further along our coast as well.
Are any sea snails poisonous?
Are any sea snails poisonous? That is a really great question. I'm actually not sure about that. I'll have to research that and type up an answer for you guys later. Yeah, I would definitely look into any snails before you eat them.
What living thing do you find most?
Ooh, I find a lot of snails and a lot of hermit crabs. Strangely enough, we actually didn't find any hermit crabs today, but those are some pretty cool animals. They are kind of unique because they actually don't grow their own shell like most other crabs. They have to find discarded shells from snails and then they live inside. But yeah, we didn't find any today to show you, unfortunately, but they're pretty cool animals. All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and continue taking a look at some more animals we have on the tide pool today. And I want to point out, because there's a lot of animals on this rock behind me, lots of really interesting ones. We're going to start with these guys back here. I have a large shell to show you. Maybe I'll show you this first. This is a mussel shell here. So an alive mussel would have two shells kind of together like this. Here we just have one, so you guys can take a closer look at it. If you turn it back, you can kind of see the lines where this mussel has grown. So as it has gotten older and older, it adds more to its shell, and you can kind of see the lines as it grows. But let's take a look at the ones on the rock really quick. These mussels are all stuck onto that rock here. I'm going to move so my head's not in my shadow's not in there. But these mussels are actually stuck onto the rock. We call this sessile. So these animals don't really move. They find a place to anchor themselves, and then they call that place home pretty much forever. And the California mussels attach themselves to the rocks through something called byssal threads. They're kind of like long little filaments. Here, I actually got one here I can show you. These long little filaments like this, kind of look like hair, can attach the mussel to the rock. And these byssal threads are actually so strong that researchers are doing research on them to try and figure out how to replicate them so that we can use them for our own everyday lives. So a really cool way that we are inspired by the animals that we find in the intertidal. Now let's talk about a kind of similar animal. I think I see something really cool over here. Let me check it out. I found some barnacles. So we actually have two animals right here, but we're going to be talking about the barnacle, this pink thing, first. Here's a larger one, so you can kind of compare. I'll step off to the side. There we go. And barnacles have some similarities to the California mussel. They are also sessile. They put themselves onto rocks or sand dollars or even boats and whales. Any hard surface these animals will attach themselves to. And they don't use bisyl threads, they use kind of like a cement-like glue that researchers are also trying to recreate in the lab, so we can use them as well. So another really strong animal, and they have to be strong to survive the pounding waves of the intertidal, so it's pretty cool. Now, barnacles and mussels are both filter feeders. So what that means is they'll pump water in and out of their bodies and take out the plankton from the water, and they also can help take out any gross stuff that's gotten into our water. So they have a pretty important job of helping us to keep our waters clean. Now, if this barnacle were alive and it were underwater, you might see kind of feather-like arms coming out of this hole, and they use those feather arms to grab onto any plankton that are in the water, which is pretty cool. And again, here's that bigger one. So the ones that live on top of whales are even bigger. Kind of crazy. But I'd like to talk about this other animal that we're observing here, and that is the sand dollar. So this sand dollar is no longer alive, but if it were alive, we would see that this sand dollar has a bunch of tiny little hairs called cilia and a bunch of little spikes as well. And that's how the animal can move around, and also how they can grab their food, and then they will move it to their mouth, which I'm going to flip it over and show you where the mouth is. There's a little tiny hole in the middle here, and that is the mouth of the sand dollar. So all of the tiny little hairs, the cilia that are around the sand dollar, will work together to move any types of food into the mouth there, which is pretty cool. Now, sand dollars have kind of an interesting behavior. When the waters are calm, they will stand straight up in the sand like this to have better access to the water and the food that's passing them by, the plankton in the water. But when the water gets rough, like maybe there's lots of waves, the sand dollar will actually lay flat and bury itself underneath the sand so that it doesn't get tossed around in the waves, which is pretty cool. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite intertidal animals, and that is the sea anemone. Now, back on this rock behind me, you can see there's lots of little like tiny bits of rocks and shells, and you might not think that they're alive, but those are actually sea anemone. So when a sea anemone is outside of the water and it's exposed to the sunlight and the heat, they actually kind of make their own sunscreen. They gather bits of shells and rocks and sand, anything they can find, and they kind of stick it onto their bodies, and that acts as a protective layer. Now, when the sea anemone is underneath the water, the animal will actually open up, and it looks kind of like a flower. Seems like all of the ones around me have kind of shrunken back. Maybe they don't have as much water, but they are really, really beautiful. So I suggest that you take a look online and see if you can find a picture of a sea anemone. They have these beautiful tentacles. They have a circular body and then tentacles coming off of the circles. And those tentacles are actually stinging tentacles, like jellyfish. They sting any prey that passes them by, and then they use their tentacles to drag them towards the center of their mouth, the center of their bodies, which is their mouths. Now, I want to take one more break and see if we have any more questions.
What do mussels eat?
What do mussels eat? Mussels eat mainly plankton. So they are filter feeders. Like I mentioned, they'll pump water in and out. And mostly what they're eating is the really, really tiny stuff. Plankton is anything that can't swim against the current. So usually it's kind of like small animals, small algae that's floating across the ocean. That's what the mussels will eat, as well as the barnacles.
How big is the biggest mussel?
The biggest mussel I have ever found. Well, if we are comparing to the shell that I found today, I would say maybe the biggest mussel I've found, maybe like up to here. They can get pretty big, yeah.
Are sea anemones poisonous?
Are they poisonous? So that depends kind of on the species. The ones that we find at the tide pool here, these are called sunburst anemones that we're looking at today. And their sting is not strong enough to hurt us. It actually just kind of feels sticky. Our skin is so thick that it won't hurt us. But other species of anemone might have stronger stings that might feel a little bit more like a sting to us.
How long do sea anemones live?
That's a great question. Sea anemones can live for a very long time. They can actually live, I think, to like 100 years old. So they're a very old species. They can live very old, yeah. Awesome. Well, we're going to move on to talk about some pretty cool animals that we might be kind of familiar with, but they're still cool nonetheless. I found this. Let me check it out. Oh, here it is. Walking on the beach, we probably have seen little bits of crab at some point, maybe just a leg or a claw, or maybe the whole thing. This guy's missing his top shell called the carapace. But mostly when we see these little bits of crab washed up on the shore, it's actually not a dead crab. It's actually what's called a molt. So crabs, just like snakes will shed their skin, crabs will shed their entire bodies. Here, I can come a little closer so we can see it better. So crabs will shed their entire bodies, the molt, their entire bodies, even their eyeballs, which is pretty crazy. And they do this because they are growing. As the crab gets larger and larger, they need a bigger body to fit their growing body. So they shed their exoskeleton and grow a new one. And that space where the crab has just molted and it's got its new shell is when a crab is kind of vulnerable. Their shell isn't quite hard yet, so they tend to hide a lot when they've just molted because they're vulnerable to predators at that time. Now, I also found a really, really cool thing, something I've never found before, and I want to show you guys. Let me see if I can find it, because it's pretty small. Let's see. Oh, there it is. All right, I'm gonna come close to the camera to show you guys. So this is the smallest crab that I have ever found. It is so young, I don't even know what species of crab this is. But I was very lucky to have picked up a little rock, and this little guy was crawling on it. Now we get to take a look at, oh! Let me get him up. Let me get a shell, I can pick him up. He's fast. All right, he's so small that I've already lost him. So we'll just let him run free. I hope you all got to take a little look at that crab, which is pretty cool. A little baby crab for us to see today. And I want to talk a little bit about how we tide pool. So going out to tide pools and exploring is a really, really fun way that we can connect with nature. And I want to give you guys a couple of tips for if you guys want to try it out yourselves. So my first tip is that you should walk very, very carefully. The tide pool can be really slippery, and there are also lots of animals that are pretty camouflaged, so we don't want to step on them and disturb them. So my first tip is walk very, very carefully. And my second tip is to use your eyes more than your hands. If you sit and wait at a tide pool, you'll notice tiny little things start to move. And it's really cool to watch these animals' natural behavior without us touching them. So it's really great to observe it that way instead of reaching in and grabbing an animal. And lastly, when you're at a tide pool, you're probably going to discover things that you've never seen before. I do every time that I go. So it's really helpful to use a couple of resources. You can use field guides that can help you identify animals, or you can even use apps. I use an app called Seek. It's kind of like a real-life Pokedex if you've ever played Pokemon before. You can snap a picture of a plant or animal, and then the app will do its best to tell you what you're looking at, where it's from, and give you a little bit of information about it. So that's a really cool way to learn more about our tide pools. Do you have any questions about that stuff?
Is it true that mother crabs house their eggs or babies in between them and their shell?
Yes, actually, I think we might be able to take a look at that with this crab molt here. So down here is where a crab will house its eggs. So for female crabs, this will be very wide, and for male crabs, it'll be very narrow. I think looking at this, it might be a female, but don't believe me 100%. I'm pretty sure it's a female, but if you just open this up, this is where the crab would store its eggs. And when the eggs are like really close to hatching, you can even see them without lifting open this part of their body. They'll just be kind of stuck out like that. And typically that's when the mother crabs will kind of like hide off and get ready to prepare for those eggs to hatch. So really, really cool. That was a really great question. Any more questions I can answer?
Can a snail survive if its shell is cracked or broken?
It cannot, yeah. So once a snail's shell has broken, that makes it really, really vulnerable, not only to predators, but all of the abiotic factors that are going on in the intertidal, right? So it'll probably get a lot warmer, it will lose water quicker. So unfortunately, if the shell has broken, the snail will not survive.
Have you ever seen an octopus or a squid in Tidepools?
I actually just saw my first octopus a couple weeks ago. So a couple weeks ago was what's called king tide, which is when the tides are really, really extreme. So really high tides and really, really low tides. So I went out at low tide and lots of people were out, and some people were kind enough to point out an octopus that they had found. It was really, really special.
Will a crab's pinch hurt?
That depends on the size of the crab. So usually like little hermit crabs, like their pinches won't hurt at all, but the bigger the crab, the harder the pinch generally.
What are the different body parts of a crab?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I can point out a couple. Well, this one's actually missing one of the biggest parts, which is the carapace, and that's the shell that goes on top. So we can all picture a live snail, and we can think of that shell that's on the top of its body. That's called the carapace. Then we got their claws, their pinchers, their legs. That's about all I've got, but I will research more on crab anatomy and let you guys know. Especially, I'm kind of curious to know what this part is called as well. So I will research that and send that answer back to you guys. Great questions. And any last questions before I move on? Okay, cool. Then I want to talk about some animals that are not quite in the tide pool, but they are around us, and those are birds. So as we are here at the tide pool today, we've actually got some birds behind us here. So that white bird with the yellow beak actually just ate a little fish that's in the tide pool. So you can see why these birds are out here today. When the tide is low, it's kind of like a buffet for these birds to come and hunt for food. So this bird that we're looking at right now is called a great egret. And it has a bird that is very, very similar to it called a snowy egret. So the way that you can tell the difference is that a great egret is bigger and has a yellow beak, whereas a snowy egret is smaller and has a gray beak. But it's really cool to observe this guy hunting around looking for food in the tide pools. Some other birds that you're going to find when you're tide pooling are seagulls, obviously. You might find pelicans, great blue herons, and lots of tiny little shorebirds like sandpipers and whimbrels. So definitely another really interesting part of our tide pools is the birds that are looking along with us. All right. I want to talk about one more organism. This one's not an animal, but it is really, really important, and that is algae. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about giant kelp. So let me grab a piece that I found on the beach here today, and I'm going to tell you about the different parts of kelp. So this web of stuff right here that I'm holding is called the holdfast. This is where the kelp is fastened to the seafloor or a rock or even a shell sometimes. And this is what keeps the kelp from moving around and getting uprooted, this really strong holdfast. And then there will be like a kind of stem that will go up, and off that stem we have our blades of kelp. This stem is actually called a stipe. And then off to the side we have these blades of kelp, and this is where the kelp does photosynthesis, right? It takes energy from the sun and turns it into energy for the plant. And in between the blade and the stipe, we have these tiny little balls you can see here. These are called gas bladders. And these are actually filled with air. This is what helps the kelp to float upwards in the ocean towards the sunlight. Kelp is actually one of the quickest growing organisms on Earth. A piece of kelp can grow 2 feet in 1 day. So they grow really, really fast. And they're also really, really important out in our ocean. When a bunch of kelp is clumped together, we call that a kelp forest. And it's a really important habitat for animals. It's a place for animals to live, to go and find food, to be protected from other predators. So kelp forests are important for the animals out there, but they're also important for us. They can help keep our air clean, keep our water clean. They're really, really special pieces of algae. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down. And I want to talk about something really important, and that is some challenges that our tide pools and our ocean are facing. The main one I want to talk about today is pollution, because while I was out looking for these creatures in the tide pool, I found a lot of things that don't belong here on our beaches. And I'm going to go ahead and show you guys so we can take a look. We found almost a whole entire bucket worth of trash. Now, because it just rained here, a lot of trash got swept up by the rain and moved across the land and into our oceans. So you can see that when it rains, there's even more trash than usual. And the majority of the trash that we found today is plastic, a material that never ever breaks down. It just breaks into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics. And once this trash gets out into our ocean, we call it marine debris. And it is really, really harmful to our oceans. It can entangle wildlife, and also many animals might mistake some of this trash as food and then eat it, which is not great for their digestive systems, not nutritious. None of us want to eat plastic. So one thing that we can do to help keep trash out of our ocean and out of our tide pools is make sure that you are picking up trash. Whether it's your trash or you didn't put it there but you see it, it's important to always pick up trash and put it in the trash can where it belongs, because when it rains, that trash can get swept up and end up in really harmful places. We call this land, well, actually all of our land is a watershed. And that's just when the water moves across the land and collects into one spot. And here in Santa Barbara, all of that water goes out into the ocean. So all of our pollution can end up in the ocean as well. So an important thing to be aware of and try to notice in your everyday life and maybe make some changes. Make sure to pick up some trash when you notice it. But I want to open it up to any last questions before we head out for the day.
Can you grow kelp or algae at home?
Can you grow kelp or algae at home? Giant kelp might be kind of difficult since it's giant. You would probably need a very big saltwater tank. But if you're into like aquariums and stuff, especially like saltwater aquariums, yeah, definitely, you could grow algae at home.
Do animals live in the kelp?
Yeah, totally. The holdfast is a really great place for tons of tiny little animals to live in when it's out in the ocean, and then also when it's been washed up onto the beach as well. Maybe you've noticed if you've ever walked past a pile of kelp that's washed up, lots of little bugs scatter. Lots of bugs like to live in here. Yeah, that's a great question.
How is algae different than kelp?
How is algae different than kelp? Kelp is just a type of algae. So algae comes in all different shapes and sizes and textures. And kelp and giant kelp is just one type. Great question.
Can you determine the age of kelp? How long does it continue to grow?
That is a great question. I don't know how you determine the age of kelp. It's not like a tree where if you look at the rings, you can count how long the kelp has been alive. So that's a great question. I'm not sure of the answer. And I think it can grow as long as there's space for it to grow. As long as it has sunlight, as long as it has space to grow up, kelp will continue to grow.
What happens when you pop the kelp bubbles?
Oh, the gas bladders, yes. It makes a noise. It makes a fun noise when you see it washed up on the beach. Yeah, if you step on it or squeeze it, it'll pop open and make a noise. It's pretty fun. All right, well, I think that's gonna do it for us today. I wanna say thank you guys so much for joining us today. And I encourage you guys to keep learning more about tide pools, keep learning more about our Earth, because we want to protect our beautiful Earth and our beautiful tide pools. Thank you again to Santa Barbara County's Project Clean Water, and we hope to see you next time. Good.